NSFW, what's the most FK'd up thing you've seen? We were at the lake with some friends. We were waiting at the dock for some more people to show up and we're just chilling in our boat. Well, another boat came flying in and rammed the boat ramp. I noticed the people inside that boat were trying to lift a person off the floor. I realized the people were covered in blood, so I ran over to help. I jumped in the boat. And there was just pools of blood everywhere. And a dude that had gone face first into then boat propeller. I was 16 and will never forget the sound he was making. Like trying to breathe. His face was stripped, like cut up almost perfectly. His jaw and one of his eyes dangling. I helped them get him off the boat and onto a towel. Covered in blood. Waited for an ambulance to arrive. He ended up dying about 20 minutes later. Legit didn't sleep for like 2 days. The worst part was there were 2 little girls in the boat. Like maybe 6-8 years old. I can't imagine what trauma it did to them. I was a firefighter for years and saw a lot. But one thing that still sticks with me is trying to perform CPR on someone who had been shot 5+ times. With the amount of bright red blood squirting out with every compression. We knew he was going to die but had to try something. Bodies squished beyond recognition in car wrecks was always tough too. Especially since it was often a hit and run or drunk driver in the bad wrecks. Also, CPR on an infant is something that I never want to be involved in or see again in my life. The bruising and swelling of my dad's eyes after being shot in the head during a robbery. He did not make it. I used to own a bar and one of our regular customers decided he wanted to die by suicide, so he shot himself in the head on our band stage in front of everyone during the band's break. Saw a hung corpse of man. On some apt stairs. Couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. He had that mile-long stare and his tongue was out. And my apt unit was a stone throws away. Moments after a guy had jumped off a 150-foot bridge onto the highway below, landing headfirst on the shoulder. Happened a few years ago and I drive that section of highway every day and still get that sickly gut feeling when I pass under that bridge. My then girlfriend attempting suicide in front of me for a second time. She had no lasting physical damage thankfully. But eventually completed suicide 5 years later. When I heard the news I couldn't stop seeing the 2 occasions on which she attempted in front of me. That's not the worst of what I've witnessed endured. A bunch of ducked up shit has happened to and around me. But I mostly operate from hearing and that's mostly what gets committed to memory. I don't have a lot of visual memories. That's honestly probably for the best. And now that I think of it, may in part be symptomatic of enduring so much tea. Infected coronary bypass wound which ate through the sternum and rib cage. The patient had a hole in her chest and the whole heart. Part of the lungs were visible. Disgusting and interesting at the same time. I had a patient whose brain tumor grew right through his skull somehow and popped out of his scalp. He wasn't diagnosed until he felt while combing his hair one morning because it was growing out of his skull and therefore not really putting too much pressure onto his brain. He had almost no symptoms. A safety instruction video from where my cousin used to work. It was about how not to operate heavy machines. It was a security footage. A guy came up to the machine. He tripped and fell right into it. It started spinning him around. After a few seconds it ripped his legs and arms off. The floor was covered with his organs. Happened last week. We were at a bar sitting on the patio. Hear a loud screech and then a thump. Someone drunk asshole had hit a pedestrian going 50 miles per hour in this tiny, pedestrian friendly street. What makes it really ducked up is that the victim's legs came flying off. Like all the way off. Didn't even land near the dude. Cops and ambulance were there real quick and we saw them loading the guy up, quite clearly missing important body parts. I keep checking the news and there's been no word about his status. I used to fix computers back in the 90s. You'll have no idea how much ducked up shitty people download. Holy shitty, the amount of CP and horrific violence I came across is absolutely insane. And a lot of times the stuff wasn't even hidden. They'd save to their desktop or something. I called the cops every time I saw stuff that was actually illegal. Of course. But you can't unsee that shit. It was horrible. It really ducked me up. I'm a volunteer firefighter and was deployed for a road crash. A drunk driver smashed into a couple who was driving on the opposite line. The two bodies were torn apart. Blood and guts everywhere in the car. I picked up a mobile phone between the girl's feet and the locking screen was a pic of her with a maybe 2-3 weeks baby. I learned later that it was their son. The drunk driver made it with minor injuries. That one dashcam video where a family are driving along and a pole or a plank of wood or something falls off a wagon in front of them. Comes right through the windscreen impaling the mum. Instantly killing her. You don't actually see anything though. It's the audio that gets you. Edit. I watched my next door neighbor fall 11 stories to his death. Hit the LA Fitness sign on the way down too. I can remember the thud of the sign then the thud to the ground. Almost sounded like a gunshot. Prior to this we heard what sounded like someone being murdered next door. Shrieks of absolute panic. We still haven't figured out if he jumped purposefully, fell, was pushed etc. Nor do we know what the screaming was for. The police never addressed us. And the apartment complex never addressed us on the issue. Our lease is up in June. Best friend was shot murdered in front of me when I was 17. Had issues with the wrong people and we were in his house watching TV when two guys kicked in the door and shot him. It happened so fast that I was still on the couch when they ran out. The scene of a Marine who committed suicide by shooting herself in the head in a Pentagon bathroom stall in 1995. Saw a 4-minute video of some guy. He was at home sitting in his chair and recording himself. People in the comments said he was an ex-military guy and had PTSD. He got a phone call from his GF and recorded it. Basically she broke up with him and he looked straight into the camera and said, "Well, that's a wrap folks." And grabbed the shotgun at his side. Loaded it. And fired into his head. Bits of his head blew everywhere. Part of it was still attached to the rest of his body by like a string of flesh. His cat was in the background too. I saw a girl run across the highway and get hit by a semi on a highway in Mississippi. I stopped and she was definitely dead. It was obvious there was nothing to be done. A bunch of people rushed out from the nearby group of trailers and started picking up her things and take her jewelry. I'm not sure what was going on. Really. A few of them were yelling at a man that was standing there and from the conversations is kind of put together she was running from him. I'm not sure if she jumped out on purpose or didn't see the truck. That's not the only fatal accident. I've been the first person to the scene but I'm on mobile and that's enough for now. They just saw someone die and all they care about is taking their stuff. I worked in a psych hospital with children who were 5 years to 11 years 11 months old. The ducked up things that parents did to their children will never leave my memory. When I worked in the prison service I saw a bloke who had choked on his own vomit. That was pretty tough. He wasn't dead when I saw him but he did die later. The result of a couple of the inmates hanging themselves too. Never the bodies for those ones but I saw them being carried away under sheets as well as what they'd hung themselves with. Also saw a prisoner airlifted to hospital after he'd managed to throw a vat of boiling oil over himself. Watch both my dad and wife die after they were taken off life support. I saw a video of a guy killing himself. He was naked and slit his wrists then began wiping blood all over his house. The whole time he was so excited about dying and how his parents would walk in on the bloody house and find him dead. He survived by the way. I saw a homeless guy in a McDonald's in Dublin vomit a thick neon yellow bile from his nose onto his burger. Then he took a bite. I used to serve in the Coast Guard. We got a call for a floating body in the river. We pull up on what appeared to be a middle-aged man belly up. We could see that his stomach had swelled from being in the water a while but couldn't figure out was in between his legs. As we got closer, we realized his nutsack swelled but 4 times the size. Needless to say that vision is forever in my head. I spent 25 years watching my wife die of multiple sclerosis. I saw someone get curb stomped 8 or 9 years ago. Found my mum in the bath. In her wedding dress. With her wrist slit after taking an overdose when I was around 9. Her lips were blue. She survived though. Edit. A lot of people are reading this. I just wanted to say. If you're struggling with your mental health. Please get help. If you're a parent. But even if you aren't. You've touched so many people's lives. You will never know how your death. Or your mental health. Will affect others. I don't blame my mum for being mentally unwell. I know it's not her fault. But it has affected me. My siblings. And our lives significantly. My biggest wish for my mum. Was that she wouldn't have gotten help. For her. And for us. I was a receptionist at a brothel in the Cross in Sydney for a couple of years. One night I'm sitting at the desk. And I get a call from room 4. 2 hours booking. Call an ambulance, she says. What for, I ask. He has a champagne bottle stuck up his ass. Not only that. After the champagne bottle they put another beer bottle in there. My dog choking on his own blood after being ran over by the school bus while trying to move his back legs for a couple seconds before going limp. I don't think there's ever a day that doesn't cross my mind. Edit. Thank you so much everyone for all the support. I never expected something like this to get so many upvotes. The kind words and stories mean so much to me. As well as the one person who gave this a reward. Saw a video of a guy ducking a snake on Reddit back in the day. That. And swap. Slums of Addis Ababa circa 1998. A stray dog eating a stillborn baby. Enough Reddit for today. One time driving on the highway I saw a small dog run onto the highway on the opposite side just as an 18-wheeler was coming. The dog literally exploded underneath the wheel of the truck and his organs flew all over the road. I found out he jumped out the window of a car of a family at a gas station and they couldn't catch him before he made onto the highway. The poor little kid was crying so much. I still remember that moment from time to time because I had a front row seat to that. A dead body that had been laying as an air-conditioned room for 4 days of 100+ weather. That was the 3rd dead body I found at that job and it was the last straw. I still see it in my nightmares 20 years later. The aftermath of a maintenance worker getting hit with a roller coaster. This accident took place on the coaster track directly above the children's rides and the roof canopies of their cheery little rides were covered with blood. Luckily he survived. But I had nightmares for weeks. A cow that went missing during calving season on my parents' farm. Dad and I found her eventually in some of the forest on the property. She had suffered paralysis during birth. And as such, was stuck on the ground. Laying on her side. During the night. Foxes had got to her and had eaten most soft appendages. Such as her ears. Part of her nose and her udder. Poor thing was very much still alive and conscious when we found her. She let out a soft, low moo when she saw us. Said this before on a separate post. But I watched a car suddenly flip 5-6 times on a highway. The people were fine but based on what the car looked like and on how recklessly they were driving I figured they wouldn't have worn seatbelts and would have been thrown around in the car. I also saw a car ducking pancaked on the highway opposite mine. Literally looked like it had been put in a compactor. Didn't see another car involved though. They had a tarp over the car. So I can only imagine the inside looked like. Side note. Someone I knew said the most ducked up thing was when he had caught a frog and shown it to his kids and some kids they were playing with. One of the kids they were playing with asked to hold the frog and he gave it to him. The kid just held it for a second then crushed it in his hands. He figured that kid will be a serial killer someday. Human that was eaten alive by a bear. Bear came at me and had to shoot it as it was protecting its kill. Had to stuff this guy's remains into bags to hike out to an access road. All the ribs had been snapped off the spine but it was a detached head. Spine with one leg still attached. One leg was under all that. The arms and a pile of skin was about 15 feet away from that. The bags we were given didn't fit the spine and leg portion, so this dude's spine was flopping around out of the bag mostly. So that was fun. I do occupational first aid in construction. A guy fell off some form work and took a hit to his groin on the way down. His genitalia were degloved. Everything that should have been inside was outside. Several men nearby who saw it passed out while I was treating him and getting him prepped to be flown out of the excavation. While it's not gory or anything like the others, it's still really sad and personal, and it ducked up my mind. So, a few months ago my grandmother died. That was the first time I went to a funeral. I'm 24 context. Seeing the people that raised you so vulnerable, so grief-stricken, just ducking breaks you, man. I still get chills when I remember my grandfather screaming, "Where are you going, sweetheart?" when they lowered the coffin to the ground. I saw a guy being upheld in the showers in prison. I know this sounds like a joke, but it's not. There was nothing I could do for him. It was such a helpless feeling. That was the most ducked up thing I've ever seen, and I will never ever get that image or those sounds out of my mind. Was in the mall, and this group of girls, 8th 9th grade at most, were following another girl who was walking quickly and crying. One of the group was screaming loudly, "You ducked my dad. I can't believe you ducked my dad." Full stop. It's one thing if they were adults, but the fact that they were in 8th to 9th grade is extremely disgusting. A young, homeless woman laying on a bench having her period. People would sit beside her and then run away like she had the plague. She was silently crying and apologizing to people for existing. I scrped all the change I had together and got her some off-brand pads. She also wasn't wearing shoes, and I had some flats I couldn't wear to work that I gave her from my bag. The ducked up part was the way people were treating her. Also, the official scene photos of an infant that was burned alive after the vehicle it was in was rear-ended by a semi on the highway. Watched my dad kick my pregnant stepmother's stomach. They lost the baby and she didn't recover for a very long time. Saw this middle-aged woman stomp on several kittens until their ducking brains and shitty popped out. I feel like those kinds of people need to get the same treatment. Playing basketball in Toronto when I was 15 with my best friend and others when bullets rang out from a car driving by. We all scattered to the exits and could feel the bullets whizzing over our heads. Came back and found out my best friend caught one in the back of the head and was taking his last breaths. He passed in my arms while waiting for the ambulance. I remember him passing vividly over 20 years later. 5 dudes running a train on a girl that just nodded and died. I watched video footage of the Sierra Leone Civil War. It involved things like living people with their flesh falling off their faces as they struggle to get up. The horrors of war are unimaginable terrors far beyond what any media has been willing to show. I saw a friend's father shoot himself in the head. I'll never forget watching the spray and material erupt from the back of his head in a misty cloud. I can't get the image of him then slumping over and the torrent of blood pouring from his face. That image will forever be burned into my mind. My one and only night in jail. Sitting in a holding tank by myself waiting for arraignment. Cops bring in a bus load of dudes and put them in a tank across the hall. So one dude heads to the toilet in the corner and takes a leak. A video of a baby seal being skinned alive. It was still shivering. My ex made me watch it 12 years ago and I still have not forgiven him. He was trying to get me to go vegetarian. Saw a neighbor in a Prius back out with a bunch of puppies still under the car. I tried to yell and stop her. I was coming from the side. She was looking back with the window up. The puppies all made it out except one. He was in the clear until she started to turn the car. The wheel caught up with the dog. Ran it over right down the middle before I could get to her. I was able to get to her and tap on her window. She looked forward and I pointed at the dog. She was just as horrified as I was. The ducked up part was how quiet it all was. The dog didn't even have a chance to yelp. It was just writhing in quiet agony. I just sat on my step and had a good cry for a minute. Probably not the most ducked up, but it's the first that comes to mind. A rafter of wild turkeys, about 30 plus of them, chased a UPS driver from trying to make a delivery to a rural home back into his truck. Watching my sister die after they disconnected her from life support. It took about 10-15 minutes for her to die. It was surreal. A heart monitor would slow down beep, 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 then jump back up to normal speed for a few minutes. The third time I looked at my brother and said she is just ducking with us now. The only solace I could take from it was that she did not have any awareness. Crazy stuff. Back in 2002, a co-worker hung himself in our break room. Apparently he and his wife had a bad argument the night before. The rumor was he had stopped taking his depression meds and that's why they were fighting. And he didn't want her to find him, so he worked late to be the last person in the building. Only problem was the following morning the big boss had brought his two twin 8-year-old daughters in with him, and one of them saw the guy hanging from the break room because the vending machines were in there and she wanted candy. The girl let out a scream I'll never forget hearing. I saw them put him in the body bag and roll him out. Then the big boss refused to let us all go home. I was working in Northern Virginia at the time, so we were all already on edge from 9/11 being so close to us and only 6 months removed. Worst part was the guy voided his bowels in the night, so the whole office smelled of feces and bleach that whole week. I quit that job a month later. I've never admitted this, so here goes. I grew up in the country. On a farm. At a young age I knew the pigs we raised would be our food someday. Etc. But once when I was about 5/6 and my oldest brother would have been about 12/13, our farm cat had kittens. Well, they were only days old and my brother took them out and threw them up in the air one at a time and shot them mid-air with his .22. Couple didn't die and he smashed their heads with a baseball bat. I remember even that little I was terrified and knew it was so wrong. I told my mom. She blew it off. Turns out, 25 years later my brother is very violent with some serious mental derangements. It's scary. I wish someone would have tried to get him the help he needed many years ago.